Is Tennessee, there are places you can still see with your own eyes, but never actually be allowed to step inside. And that is the strangest part. These are not all military bases or top-secret government sites. Some are abandoned amusement parks still visible from public parking lots. Some are old schools, private castles, decaying hotels, or places that were once famous enough to make almost anyone want to visit at least once. But the closer you get, the more you realize the boundary was drawn a long time ago. Some are off limits because they are dangerous, some because they are private, and some because the days of visiting them ended for good a long time ago. In this video, we are going through 10 forbidden places in Tennessee where the public's curiosity stops right at the gate. And the farther down the list we go, the stranger the reasons get. On number 10. Fun Mountain. And if you are in Gatlinburg long enough, you might end up parking near a place where the past is still hanging in plain sight. Not metaphorically, by the way, literally hanging there. Old chairlift seats from Fun Mountain have been reported still visible from a public parking area, just sitting there like the ghost of a place that used to make noise for a living. And that is what makes this spot so strange. You can still see pieces of it. You just are not supposed to go wandering in. That is the whole hook of Fun Mountain. It was never some underground bunker or military site. It was a family attraction in one of the busiest tourist towns in Tennessee. Back in the 1990s, this was supposed to be a fun stop in Gatlinburg, the kind of place built for rides, games, and kids burning off sugar while their parents tried to survive another vacation afternoon. Before that, the land had already lived another life as the old Mountain View Hotel, which gives the whole spot an even weirder feeling now. This little patch of ground has gone from historic hotel to tourist attraction to something the public is mostly left to look at from the outside. And that is where the forbidden part starts to make sense. Because the interesting thing about Fun Mountain is not that it vanished. It did not completely. People have said you can still catch remnants of it from the parking lot, which is almost worse for your curiosity than if it had disappeared entirely. If something is gone, fine, your brain moves on. But if you can still see the bones of it sitting there on the hillside, your first instinct is to get closer. Just a little closer. Just enough to see what is left. That is exactly the line you are not supposed to cross. The area beyond that public view has been described as posted against trespassing, which turns Fun Mountain from an abandoned attraction into something much more effective for a countdown like this. It is close, it is visible, it feels reachable, but the public part ends before the real curiosity begins. And honestly, that may be what makes it creepier than a lot of places that try much harder. Fun Mountain is not scary because it is hidden. It is scary because it is still there, just far enough out of reach to remind you that some places do not disappear. They simply stop being yours to enter. Number 9. Knoxville College Abandoned Buildings. If you saw the abandoned side of Knoxville College from a distance, you might think it was just another old campus that ran out of luck. Empty windows, worn brick, that quiet, heavy-look places get when time has been winning for a long while. But this place carries a lot more weight than that. Knoxville College was founded in 1875 as a historically black college, a place built for education, opportunity, and a mission that mattered far beyond one neighborhood. That is part of what makes the decay feel so wrong. And it did not become abandoned overnight. The school lost accreditation years ago, enrollment kept falling, money got tighter, and by 2015, the college had suspended classes as the campus slipped deeper into crisis. So when people look at these buildings now, they are not just looking at age. They are looking at what happens when a place with a real purpose slowly runs out of ways to keep itself alive. Now, here is where the tone changes. Because the abandoned buildings at Knoxville College are not the fun kind of abandoned. Not the kind where people sneak in, take moody photos, and pretend they are in a documentary. Local fire officials have warned that trespassing became a serious problem on the property, and WBIR reported that firefighters were dealing with repeated fires on campus, tied in part to people getting inside buildings they were never supposed to enter. So right away, this place stops being curious and starts becoming dangerous. Then there is A.K. Stewart Science Hall, which honestly makes the whole thing even worse. EPA records say the building was abandoned with thousands of chemical containers still inside. Some were leaking, some were damaged, some had missing labels. The building itself had broken windows and unsecured access points, which is exactly the kind of detail that makes you want to ask who on earth thought wandering in there was a good idea. It was not just unsafe, it was the kind of unsafe that could go sideways fast. That is what makes Knoxville College different from a lot of abandoned places. It is not off limits because somebody wanted to make it mysterious. It is off limits because history, neglect, fire risk, and hazardous materials turned a once meaningful campus into a place where curiosity can become a really bad decision. And somehow that makes it sadder than scary. Number 8. The Evil Dead Cabin Site. If you are the kind of person who grew up on horror movies, this place has a weird pull almost right away, because the cabin site from The Evil Dead is not some fake little attraction built later to cash in on the movie. This is the real filming location tied to the 1981 film out near Morristown, Tennessee. And for horror fans, that changes the feeling immediately. It stops being just some old spot in the woods and starts feeling like one of those places your brain already knows before your feet ever get there. The strange part is that if you picture the cabin from the movie, that is not really what is waiting there now. The cabin itself has been gone for years. What people mostly talk about now are the remnants, especially the old chimney area and traces of what used to be there. So this is not the kind of place where you roll up, hop out, and get the full movie moment. It is more like standing near the outline of a memory and letting your imagination do the rest. And honestly, that probably makes it more tempting, because once a place becomes famous, especially in horror, people start treating it like it belongs a little bit to everybody. Like if you love the movie enough, that should count for something. But in this case, it really does not. Atlas Obscura puts it pretty plainly. The site is on private property, and going onto it is trespassing. That is the line. Not be respectful, not visit carefully. Just know. That is what makes this place fit the list so well. It is not guarded like some secret government facility. It is not hidden behind a giant legend either. The tension here is much simpler. People know exactly why they want to see it, and they still are not supposed to step onto the land. There is something almost fitting about that. A place so tied to one of the most famous cabin in the woods movies ever made now sits out there as its own kind of warning sign. So in the end, the real hook of the Evil Dead cabin site is not just that it is famous. It is that it still exists enough to stir up your curiosity, but not enough to welcome you in. And sometimes that is all a place needs to become unforgettable. Number 7. Whirlwind Mansion. If you saw Whirlwind Mansion from the road without knowing the story, you would probably assume one of two things. Either some Tennessee millionaire still lives there behind locked gates, or the whole place is one strong wind away from starring in a Southern Gothic movie. Honestly, both feelings make sense, because Whirlwind has that rare look some properties have, where even from a distance you can tell it used to mean something big. The mansion sits out in Clinton, Tennessee, and it was built in the early 1970s during the rise of Jake Butcher, a banker and political figure whose name once carried a lot of weight in the state. This was not some modest rich person house either. It was huge, flashy, and built to feel important, the kind of place that does not quietly exist. It announces itself, and for a while, that probably worked just fine. Then the story turned. After Butcher's banking scandal and fraud conviction, the property was seized, and like a lot of places tied too closely to one person's rise, it never really recovered its old meaning. Over the years, it slipped into that strange category of American buildings that are too big, too specific, and too loaded with history to easily become normal again. At one point, it was even divided into condos, which honestly sounds like the real estate version of trying to turn a peacock into office furniture. Technically possible, probably, but deeply unnatural. It looks like the kind of place people would want to stop and explore, especially once the rumors, the history, and the dramatic look of the house all start stacking up in your head. But that curiosity runs straight into a very simple reality. It is private property. Atlas Obscura notes that newer owners repaired the place and put up no trespassing signs right at the gate. So whatever the mansion was before, whatever stories people attach to it now, it is not a place the public is invited to wander through, and that may be the most fitting ending for a house like this. Whirlwind was built to be seen, built to impress, built to project power. But now the only thing it really projects is distance. You can look at it, wonder about it, maybe imagine what the inside must feel like now, but the gate does the talking for you. This place is still standing. It is still dramatic. It is just not yours to enter. Number 6. Dolly Parton's childhood home. If you are a Dolly Parton fan, this is one of those places that can confuse your instincts a little. Because technically, yes, you can visit Dolly's childhood home in Tennessee. Thousands of people do. But the version most people see is the replica at Dollywood, not the actual house where she grew up. Dollywood says its attraction is a 2-room replica of her Locust Ridge childhood home, built so visitors can step into that story without stepping into the real place. And honestly, that tells you everything right away. The public gets the retelling. The real home is something else, and the real home matters, because it is not just some random little cabin people attached her name to later. The Library of Congress notes that Dolly's childhood home was in Locust Ridge, tucked into the mountains of East Tennessee, and that the house was important enough to be featured on her 1973 album My Tennessee Mountain Home. So when people think about that place, they are not just thinking about a building. They are thinking about the roots of Dolly herself, the poverty she grew up in, the music, the memory, the whole mythology around where she came from. Which is exactly why people want the real thing. That is where the line shows up, because the actual home in Locust Ridge is not a public attraction. It is private. The whole point of the Dollywood replica is that it gives people a way to experience that chapter of her life without treating the original place like a tourist stop. And that makes sense if you think about it for more than 2 seconds. If the real home were easy to walk up to, it would probably have strangers pulling up constantly, taking photos, peeking around, acting like love for a celebrity somehow counts as permission. It does not. That is what makes this one so interesting for the list. It is not forbidden in the dramatic way some places are. There is no ruined lab, no barbed wire in the woods, no fire department warning people away. The tension here is quieter than that. The whole world knows Dolly Parton. The whole world can visit the version of her childhood home made for the public. But the actual place, the one tied to the real memories, stays up on Locust Ridge, outside that invitation. And maybe that is fitting. Some stories can be shared with everybody. The place they came from cannot. Number 5. Higdon Hotel. The strange thing about the Higdon Hotel is that it was originally built for the exact opposite of what it is now. This was once a place meant to receive people. Travelers, railroad workers, summer guests. It started as a house in the late 1800s, then grew into a hotel when the railroad came through Reliance and turned that little stretch of Tennessee into a stop along a living route. So in its first life, the whole point of the building was simple. People were supposed to come in. That is what makes the place feel so different now. Because today, the Higdon Hotel does not belong to that version of itself anymore. What survives is an abandoned building with a lot of history attached to it, but history is not the same thing as access. And that is the line people tend to forget when they look at old places like this. The older and more atmospheric a building gets, the more people start treating it like it is public somehow. Like decay turns private property into an open invitation. It does not. In this case, the warning is not subtle. Local historical coverage says the building is on private property, under surveillance, and people are told very clearly not to trespass. That is about as direct as it gets. Not visit carefully, not look from a distance if you can. Just do not go in, which changes the feeling of the whole place immediately. Because now the story is not just about an old Appalachian hotel slowly falling apart, it is about a building that still pulls curiosity toward it, while making it very clear that curiosity is not enough to get you through the boundary. And honestly, that may be the most interesting part of the Higdon Hotel. A place that once existed to welcome strangers now does the exact opposite. The building still stands there like it remembers its old job, but the rules around it have changed completely. No check-in desk, no guests, no wandering through to see what is left. Just a private property line, active surveillance, and a reminder that some pieces of Tennessee history can still be seen but not entered. It is not forbidden because of some dramatic conspiracy or horror movie twist. It is forbidden in a quieter, more believable way. Time hollowed it out, ownership drew the line, and now the only version of this old hotel the public really gets is the one from the outside looking in. Number 4, Two Rivers Mansion. Two Rivers Mansion is one of those places that can fool you a little at first, because if you see a big historic house sitting in a park, your brain does what everybody's brain does. You assume it is open. Maybe not all the time, maybe not every room, but open enough that you can walk up, step inside, and get the full old house experience. That is not really how this one works, and that is exactly why it fits this list. The mansion goes all the way back to 1859, when it was built as the home of the McGavock family out in what is now the Donaldson area of Nashville. So this is not some imitation Southern mansion built for weddings later. It is the real thing, with the age, the history, and the kind of look that makes people slow down and wonder what it must have been like inside when it was still somebody's home. The problem is wondering and entering are two very different things. Because today, Two Rivers Mansion does not operate like the kind of historic house where the public can just wander in whenever they feel like it. Metro Nashville is pretty clear that the mansion does not keep regular public operating hours, and the house, gazebo, and surrounding grounds are mainly used for private functions. That changes the whole mood of the place. Suddenly, it is not a mansion you can visit. It is more like a mansion you might get access to under the right circumstances. And those are very different categories. That is really the tension here. The park around it is public. People can be nearby, they can see it, they can walk the grounds around the area, but the mansion itself plays by a different set of rules. There are guided tours at certain times and special arrangements for certain groups, which means this is not a place that simply opens itself to random curiosity. You do not just drift in because you happen to be passing by and thought, why not? And honestly, that is what makes Two Rivers Mansion interesting for this countdown. It is not forbidden in the dramatic way some places are. There is no warning about fire risk or hazardous chemicals or barbed wire in the woods. It is more controlled than that, more polite even, but the message still lands the same way once you get there. This house may look public from the outside, but access to the real experience is limited, scheduled, and mostly reserved, which means for the average person, the front door is usually more idea than invitation. Number 3. Castle Gwynn. Castle Gwynn is one of those places that can trick you just by existing. Because the second most people see a full-blown castle sitting on a hill in Tennessee, the assumption is pretty automatic. It must be open. Maybe tickets, maybe tours, maybe some gift shops selling dragon magnets on the way out. That is usually how our brains file places like this. Big, unusual, photogenic equals public. But Castle Gwynn does not really work that way. The castle in Arrington is not some medieval ruin preserved for tourists. It is a private residence, the home of Mike and Jackie Freeman, and that part matters more than people think. Yes, it is famous. Yes, it is tied to the Tennessee Renaissance Festival. And yes, that association makes a lot of people assume the whole place is basically a permanent attraction. It is not. It is a real home that just happens to look like the kind of place people expect to be able to wander through whenever they feel like pretending they belong in armor. That is where the line gets clearer. The reason Castle Gwynn feels publicly accessible is because the Tennessee Renaissance Festival gives people a controlled glimpse of it. but even that access is pretty limited. The castle's own site says the public only gets outdoor visits during festival weekends and only during a narrow block of time. So even when the place is open, it is not open in the usual sense. You are not getting free run of a castle. You are getting a carefully limited peek at part of a private property during a specific event window. Outside of that, the place goes right back to being what it actually is, somebody else's home. And honestly, that may be why Castle Gwynn is more interesting than a normal tourist site. It is famous enough that people recognize it, visible enough that people assume access, but restricted enough that the public experience never really extends beyond what the owners decide to share. That creates a weird tension around the whole place. It looks like an invitation. It is actually a boundary. So Castle Gwynn is not forbidden in the harsh, no trespassing signs and barbed wire sense. It is something subtler than that. It is a place people think they can enter because they have seen it connected to a public festival. But most of the year, the truth is much simpler. The castle is still there, still dramatic, still very real, and still not yours to just walk into. Number 2, Minister's Treehouse site. The weird thing about Minister's Treehouse is that this was never supposed to be a hidden place. In fact, for years it was famous precisely because people could go see it. This was the giant treehouse in Knoxville that kept showing up in travel stories, roadside attraction lists, and random conversations that sounded half made up. The kind of place where if somebody described it too fast, you would assume they were exaggerating. A preacher built a massive treehouse in the woods, kept adding to it for years, and somehow turned it into one of the strangest landmarks in Tennessee. That sounds fake right up until you realize it was real. And that is exactly why the story hits harder now, because for a long time the whole draw of Minister's Treehouse was the fact that people actually could enter it. They could walk into this towering wooden maze, climb through it, look around, and tell themselves they had seen one of the weirdest places in America with their own eyes. Then reality finally caught up with the legend. In 2012, officials shut it down over serious safety concerns. Not minor concerns either. We are talking about a structure that fire officials and inspectors viewed as dangerous enough that public access had to end. So just like that, the experience people came for was over. Not limited, not reduced. Over. That is what makes this place fit the list so well. The forbidden part here is not really about a fence or a private gate. It is about a place that crossed a line from open curiosity into obvious risk. Once that happened, walking into it stopped being an adventure story and started sounding more like a terrible decision with a very bad ending. And then somehow the story got even stranger, because after it was closed, the treehouse just sat there for years. Empty, vulnerable, still famous enough that people kept thinking about it, and still off limits enough that the whole thing took on an even more mythic feel. Then in 2019, it burned to the ground in a matter of minutes, and that changed the meaning of the place all over again. Now it is not just a legendary site you are not supposed to enter. It is a legendary site you cannot really enter anymore, because the thing people came to see is gone. So Minister's Treehouse works on this list in a very particular way. It was once open, then closed, then lost. And there is something oddly sad about that. A place built to lift people upward eventually became too dangerous to enter and then disappeared before curiosity ever got a second chance. Number 1. Greenback Castle. Greenback Castle is the kind of place that makes people slow down without even meaning to. You see something that looks like a handmade fortress rising out of rural Tennessee, and your brain immediately starts trying to sort it into a category. Is it a tourist stop, a church thing, some private art project that got wildly out of hand? The honest answer is a little bit of all that, which is probably why the place sticks in people's heads. It does not look like it belongs where it is, and that alone is enough to make people want a closer look. The castle is also known as the Fortress of Faith, and that name gets you a lot closer to what it really is. This was not built as a public attraction in the usual sense. It was the long personal project of Floyd Jr. Banks, who spent years shaping it into something that reflected his own beliefs, symbols, and sense of purpose. So even though it looks like one of those weird roadside places people assume they can just walk up to, it really comes from one man's world. That matters because places built that personally do not automatically belong to the public just because the public gets curious. And that is really where Greenback Castle fits this list. Because the tension here is not the same as an abandoned school with hazard warnings or a property with big no trespassing signs plastered everywhere. This one works differently. Greenback Castle feels accessible in the way strange landmarks often do. It looks like something people should be allowed to stop and explore, if only because it is so unusual. But the closer you get to the story, the more obvious it becomes that this is not some free-roaming public experience. It is private land, shaped by a private vision, and whatever relationship people have with it from the road is not the same thing as having the right to enter it. That is what makes Greenback Castle memorable. It stands there like a question mark in the landscape, half curiosity, half boundary. You can look at it and feel the pull of it right away, but that does not mean it opens itself to you. And honestly, maybe that is the whole point. The castle feels mysterious not because nobody has ever seen it, but because it seems to offer a glimpse into someone else's inner world while still reminding you that the door into that world was never really yours to walk through. What stayed with me most about these places is not just that people cannot freely enter them. It is the feeling that Tennessee still has corners of its story the public can only stand outside and wonder about. Some are locked away by danger, some by privacy, and some simply by time. Personally, I think that mystery is exactly what makes them so unforgettable. The moment a place stops belonging to everyday life, it starts living in your imagination instead. And honestly, that may be even more powerful than seeing the inside. If there is another hidden or off-limits place in Tennessee I should cover next, let me know in the comments.